Okay, I think we're live and streaming now. So let's get started. Om Jnana Timinandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Jakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gurai Pushpavanto Chitra Sando Tamororo Vandeham Shri Rama Krishna Avaya Charnasago Sukado Paramanando Sundaro Subalapayo Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Okay, nice to have you all joining. And thank you to those who will join us through the record. We're continuing our discussion of Prahlad's simple-hearted devotion. This will be our last class. We'll focus on his one-pointedness, his exclusive, unalloyed devotion as a kind of a quality of simplicity, and how from this, a lot of the other qualities that we've studied kind of bear fruit from this one, are given life, empowered through this. But first, we'll do just a brief recap of last week on Prahlad's compassion as an element of his simple-heartedness. So we talked briefly how Maya, Prahlad describes how Maya creates a sense of duality, a sense of friends and enemies, and how one's limited in the world and one's interactions through this type of vision, and how to transcend this is through pleasing Krishna, directly through pleasing Krishna, coming in touch with Krishna as the kind of the underlying consciousness that connects all jivas. One's able to transcend this sense of duality and feel an intimate connection, a love, a compassion with all other living beings, and how showing mercy to other jivas pleases Krishna. So in this way we see it's cyclical. Through pleasing Krishna, we're given a vision, a connectedness which enables us to share mercy with others. And then through sharing mercy with other jivas, Krishna is very pleased by that. So cyclically we kind of grow in that, and those expressions become higher and higher. We talked about the importance not to neglect one's own sadhana in pursuit of showing mercy or compassion to others, because really deep connection to Krishna, inner connection, is the source of one's compassion. Really compassion flows out through that. So we really need both these, this kind of deep connection to Krishna, and then how Bhaktivinoda described Loy Krishnanam Jiva Doy, show compassion to other living beings, always chant the name of Krishna. So these two kind of go hand in hand. And we talked about how Prahlad not only forgave Hiranyakashipu's aparads, his offenses to Prahlad, very grave offenses, trying to kill him repeatedly. But not only forgave that, but really, truly wanted to bless him with bhakti. We talked about how Vaishnavas, in their soft-heartedness, their simplicity, are really oceans of mercy. And so we offered a prayer to Prahlad, also the Vaishnavas, Sri Guru. Please forgive me for any offenses I have committed at the lotus feet of the Vaishnavas, and please soften my heart so that I may be merciful with those who are harsh or inconsiderate in their dealings with me. So that was a brief recap of last week on compassion, and here we proceed into the final quality. There's unlimited qualities that can that are expressions of simplicity. Two other that came to mind, stood out in Prahlada's character, but that we didn't have time to explore, were humility and gratefulness. So maybe some other class we can explore those, but today we're gonna focus on one-pointedness, his exclusive devotion, and how this is truly the fountain from which all these other qualities that we've explored, his detachment, his not wasting time, his compassion, how these kind of flow out of his one-pointed devotion to Krishna. So we'll start with a verse in which Narad is describing to Yudhishthira. That's kind of the setup of this whole Leela. Narad is describing to Yudhishthira the story of Prahlada. And in that, in kind of his introduction, he says, this is 430. He said, the verse goes, Tasya Daitya Pate Putras Chatvara Paramadbhuta Prarado Bun Mahams Tesham Guner Mahad Upasaka. Hiranyakasipu had 4 wonderful, well-qualified sons, of whom the one named Prahlada was the best. Indeed, Prahlada was a reservoir of all transcendental qualities, because he was an unalloyed devotee of the personality of Godhead. So I chose this verse because Prabhupada has a very interesting purport, and it's kind of one that I was planning to dive into anyways, but nice to see that Prabhupada has also quoted it in connection. He brings us to 5:18:12 in his purport. He refers us to that. And that verse is, it's a pretty famous verse. It's Yasyasti Bhaktir Bhagavatat Akinchana Sarva Gunas Tatra Samasate Sura Harav Abhak Tasya Kuto Mahad Guna Manoratena Sati Davato Bahi. And the verse is translated as, all the demigods and their exalted qualities, such as religion, knowledge, and renunciation, become manifest on the body of one who has developed unalloyed devotion for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. On the other hand, a person devoid of devotional service and engaged in material activities has no good qualities. Even if he is adept at the practice of mystic yoga or the honest endeavor of maintaining his family and relatives, he must be driven by his own mental speculations and must engage in the service of the Lord's external energy. How can there be any good qualities in such a man? So it's a little bit harsh, but it's also very sweet and very beautiful. If seen in the right context, it kind of expresses the bias, Krishna's bias towards his transcendental bias towards his devotees, which transcends material good and bad biases. So it's a transcendental sweetness depicted in this verse. So what it's basically saying is that sattvic qualities, qualities like detachment, like we've been exploring in this class, detachment, not wasting time, compassion, one-pointedness, focus. These qualities are kind of like a feast. It's like a big feast that you've prepared with no one to serve it to. So they're nice, but what's the point? Who are they for? What's their deeper meaning? What's their reach? What's their depth? They're kind of just stationary without that service to Krishna, without being employed in the service to Krishna. And so in that sense, this verse is describing how a Vaishnava naturally has all good qualities, because all those qualities are properly utilized. Those qualities are submissively and humbly offered, wholesale offered, along with oneself, because they're expressions of oneself, over to Krishna. Whereas one who kind of keeps it more for themselves, they don't have the same sweetness, the same beauty, the same height, and connection to Krishna. So in one sense, you could say sattvic qualities in and of themselves are useless. But it's also said that a sattvic nature, sattvic qualities are conducive, are useful in that they kind of set the stage. They allow bhakti to be shared easier. It's easier for someone who is of a sattvic disposition to kind of receive and grow the seed of bhakti than one who is more covered by tamasic and rajasic qualities. Bhakti will have to do more cleansing of those first before it can really grow. And also, one of a sattvic nature will naturally be more receptive to bhakti. So in that sense, you could say they're useful, but only in their potential with bhakti. And actually, their full potential is that they're no longer sattvic. When bhakti is fully ingressed, infused in the heart of a jiva, these qualities of detachment, compassion, not wasting time, humility, tolerance, gratefulness, these qualities are no longer sattvic when they're expressions of bhakti. They're expressions of the nirgun, the swarup shakti. And in that sense, they become very, very beautiful. And that's why this verse here is stating devotee has all good qualities. Every single one of them is infused with the swarup shakti. So they're all very sweet and they're all very pleasing to Sri Krishna. So with that in mind, Prahlad's, which we'll be exploring in this class, Prahlad's exclusive devotion, his one-pointed desire to serve Krishna and please Krishna, that beautifies all his other qualities. That makes all his other qualities very sweet, very beautiful. And that's why we've been meditating on them. That's why we've been trying to identify with them, learn how to cultivate them in our own lives and so forth. So I guess we should explore Prahlad's one-pointed devotion, his unalloyed devotion. So in the 7th chapter of the 7th canto, Prahlad is actually the 6th chapter and the 7th chapter. He's been teaching the school students what's the goal of life and how he personally came to attain it through the mercy of Narad in the womb and so forth. And at the very end of the 7th chapter, the very last verse, this is kind of the conclusion of Prahlad's longest discourse on sadhana and sadhya. And at the last verse, he says, Etavan eva lokasmin pumsa svarta parasmita ekanta bhaktir govinda yat sarvatra tad ikshanam. And the translation is, in this material world, to render service to the lotus feet of Govinda, the cause of all causes, and to see him everywhere is the only goal of life. This much alone is the ultimate goal of life, as explained by all the revealed scriptures. So that's a nice verse. He describes the goal of life as ekanta bhakti, which means unalloyed. Ekanta means, Prabhupada translates, unalloyed bhakti, devotional service. So unalloyed would mean not encumbered by desires for karma or gyan, or to think that one's bhakti is dependent on actions of karma or actions of knowledge and so forth, gyan. This orientation, this connection to Sri Krishna is the real goal of life, the only goal of life. So it's interesting that in this verse, Prahlad says Govinda, which of course is a name most connected to Krishna, Krishna and Vrindavan. Go means cows, Vinda means gives pleasure. So he who gives pleasure gives bliss to the cows. Go also means senses. So he who gives pleasure, bliss to the senses of his devotee. So we could question, okay, why is Prahlad praying to Govinda? I thought Hiranyakashipu was his Ishtadev. But it's often described how, actually Sri Krishna is the Ishtadev of Prahlad. He is the deity that Prahlad is worshipping, Govinda. And that Krishna manifests himself as Nrsimha to protect Prahlad, to kind of corresponding, with Hiranyakashipu's prayer to Brahma, and where he asks for this boon, that boon. So Krishna will go to very extreme lengths, very extreme ends. Will put himself in such a position, dress himself up in such a way as to protect his devotee, as to reciprocate with the unalloyed, the ekanta bhakti that Prahlad is describing here. So in this verse, Prahlad first describes ekanta bhakti, which means service, and then goes on to describe sarvatra tad ikshanam, everywhere seeing Krishna, sees Krishna everywhere and his service everywhere. So it's notable that in describing the ultimate goal of life, Prahlad is first emphasizing service, So the goal is not just to see Krishna, but to relate to him, to connect deeply with him in a loving exchange, and how that's the natural dynamic of that between servant and deity is through devotional service, through loving service. So to approach him in that way, one's able to see him everywhere. It's not that one sees Krishna everywhere and then serves him. It's not that you wait to see Krishna till you serve him. Or you wait to see Krishna before you serve him. But it's actually through service that you're given vision. And the depth, the encompassing nature of your service will have a corresponding relationship to the depth and all-encompassing nature of your vision of Sri Krishna. So if you're able to see service everywhere, you'll naturally see Krishna everywhere. And as Prahlada mentions here, the name used is Govinda. So Govinda means giving pleasure to the senses. So if one's seeing Krishna everywhere, that means one's experienced the bliss, the pleasure. I've seen Krishna everywhere. And we read this in the beginning descriptions of Prahlada, which we talked about in the first or second class, I think the second class, and how Prahlada was always embraced by Krishna, always dancing, crying, trembling in ecstasy, or stunned, silent. So these kind of manifestations of bliss were correspondence to his ability to see Krishna everywhere, corresponding to his, as we talked about, service, his ability to see service and feel inspired and dedicated to that service that came to him. So in this verse, in describing the only goal, the real interest, Prahlada uses the word sva artha. Artha means value, and sva means real, full. And so arthas are that which we intrinsically feel are meaningful, purposeful, should be done, and will satisfy ourselves, will bring satisfaction. So as sadhakas, we may currently have anarthas, which means like false values. So we may have a conception of certain values of things that won't give us full satisfaction, but we still feel like we have to do them. We intrinsically feel they have to be done. There's meaning, there's purpose, there's joy in them, and really there isn't a full expression. It's temporary and limited based on like a small dharmic maybe consideration, or even kama, like a small pleasure, sensual pleasure, and so forth. And so Prahlada here mentions, with that in mind, I think, smrita. And so he brings in the revealed scriptures to kind of back his statement here. He says this is explained by all the revealed scriptures. In case the students don't believe him, don't believe his word, he says, no, this isn't just my opinion. All the saints, the sages, the revelation that's come to us through Sabda Brahman, through Vyas, and through the sound of God, it's all corresponding with what I'm expressing. that this unalloyed devotion, devotional service and vision of Sri Krishna is the real goal of life. And so we have these two. We have book Bhagavat, person Bhagavat. So Prahlada, of course, has been exemplifying this throughout the whole Leela. That's why the students are listening to him in the first place. He's created a teachable moment through his actions, through his example, through his absorption, and corresponding compassion. So they've been taken by that. And so they've asked him, what are you about? And how did you become like this? So we have person Bhagavat and we have the book Bhagavat. So Prahlada is referencing the book Bhagavat that corresponds with those. And those two things will together give us, slowly, help us imbibe a real sense of artha, svartha, real sense of value in devotional service, and correspondingly a decreasing sense of value, purpose in things separate from that. Other things connected to that will still find value and so forth, but things that are independent of that goal of Ekanta Bhakti will no longer find value or purpose. And so the question comes up, okay, well, if we have some anarthas, how do we go from anarthas to svartha? How do we go from false values to real value? And so in the 6th chapter, so this is the end of his discourse. And this, where I'm going back to now, is the beginning of his discourse. This is the 2nd verse, 6th chapter, 7th canto, where Prahlada is speaking to the students, and he says, Yata hi parushasyeha Vishnu paro pasapanam yad esha sarva bhutanam priya atmeshvara suhit. Translation is, one should perform bhakti by the methods which allow one to surrender to the lotus feet of the Lord, since the Lord is a dear lover, a son, Brahman, the master, and the friend of all beings. So I thought this was a nice verse in that he emphasizes, this is Vishwanath's translation, where Vishwanath emphasizes, brings us out of Prahlada's words. He says that one should perform those angas of bhakti that promote surrender. And so, of course, there's the famous 9 verses of sorry, one sec, I lost it. The famous 9 verses of Prahlada, 9 angas that Prahlada gives of bhakti, when he's asked by Hiranyakashipu, what have you learned from your teachers? And so Prahlada, naturally, in his Vaishnav mind and heart, he thinks, oh, my teacher's Narad. I mean, Hiranyakashipu is asking about his school teachers, but Prahlada's mind just immediately goes to Narad. Oh, he's my teacher. And so he responds by saying, Shravanam kirtanam vishnu smanam padasevanam archanam bandham dasyam sakyam atmanivedanam. Iti pumsar pita vishnu bhaktis chenava lakshana. Kriyeta bhagavat ada tan manye ditam uttamam. So Prahlada says, hearing and chanting about the transcendental holy name, form, qualities, paraphernalia, and pastimes of Lord Vishnu, remembering them, serving the lotus feet of the Lord, offering the Lord respectful worship with 16 types of paraphernalia, offering prayers to the Lord, becoming his servant, considering the Lord one's best friend, and surrendering everything unto him. These 9 processes are accepted as pure devotional service. One who has dedicated his life to the service of Krishna through these 9 methods should be understood to be the most learned person, for he has acquired complete knowledge. So these are the 9 angas that promote surrender. These are the ways in which one will come to learn, realize, imbibe a sense of the real goal of life is to what will really bring meaning, purpose, beauty, satisfaction to my life will be service, exclusive service to Sri Krishna in a corresponding relationship connected to that. And so these 9 angas of sadhana bhakti are the way that Prahlad's saying we should develop that sense. Of these 9 angas, 1 or 2 may be especially attractive to one. Someone may be especially attracted to deity seva. Someone may be especially attracted to reading and remembering the pastimes of Krishna. One may be especially attracted to serving Shri Guru, active service, and so forth. Hearing, one may like to hear from the Vaishnavas and so forth. And so Prahlad's saying one should perform those methods which promote surrender. So if one's feeling a special attraction to a certain anga or two, one should give deference to that anga and prioritize that anga of bhakti in one's life, because it's coming to one in that way, it will promote surrender that much more. We should really follow our taste. If we're finding inspiration, taste in a certain direction, we should go with it. We should use that momentum and try to receive the blessings of that, and try and draw as much. If mercy is coming in a certain direction, we should give all attention to that. That said, I didn't have time to find it, but so someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Jiva Goswami describes that although all the angas of bhakti can give perfection, it must be in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that he's commenting on Rupa Goswami's. He said, although it's true, they should all be accompanied by Srinam, by Kirtan, and by extension, Japa. And because, as described in the age of Kali, Harinam, 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 Eva Kevalam. It's the only way in the age of Kali. So although all these angas are fully powerful to promote surrender, promote a true sense of value in connection to bhakti, this chanting and by extension japa of Srinam will fuel all of that, will give special power, special mercy all those angas of bhakti, so that they can fully bear fruit. Guru Maharaj would often describe how before going out and distributing books, he would chant before the deities, and he would just chant until he until he was fully he describes until he was inspired. He would chant his japa before the deities until he was fully moved and inspired to share, for that to overflow, and share that, and talk about that with others and so forth. So it's through Sri Nam that all these other angas of bhakti can really bear their full fruit. But as mentioned before, if you are feeling a certain attraction to certain angas, definitely give special attention to that. So that's how Prahlad's saying we can promote surrender. We can promote this exclusive one-pointedness, this kind of simple-hearted directness, tunnel vision, you might say, for pleasing Sri Krishna. Where Guru Maharaj describes everything else just becomes like music, like just background music and service to Sri Krishna. That comes in the foreground, and other things may go on, but it's all orbiting around this. And the result of this ekanta bhakti, this exclusive, unalloyed devotion that Prahlada teaches and exemplifies so nicely, is that we can approach Sri Krishna fearlessly. And Prahlada's such a beautiful example of this. We turn to the 9th chapter of the 7th canto. So this is right after Nrsimha has just obliterated Hiranyakasipu and garlanding himself with the intestines of Hiranyakashipu. We can see what he thinks of Vaishnava Aparad. But first, after that, all the demigods come forth and offer pretty elaborate prayers of submission and reverence and so forth. But we see Nrsimha is still he's still pretty riled up. These prayers, I mean, it's just one after another, have not been able to appease him. Nrsimha is still very angry. And so the demigods are all afraid to approach him. Narad Muni is describing, this is text 1, he says, the demigods headed by Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, and other great demigods dared not come forward before the Lord, who at that time was extremely angry. So we can think of anger as a way to almost apply pressure to a situation. And it said under pressure, one's real kind of inner heart may come out. And so we see sometimes Guru and Krishna may put pressure, maybe through anger or maybe through some other way, maybe through silence. They may put pressure. Guru Maharaj often talks about how Prabhupada used to, just through his eyes, he said that most devotees couldn't maintain eye contact with Prabhupada just because his eyes were of such an intensity. They couldn't um, but Brahmaj felt such mercy behind that intensity. He found himself attracted to and able to maintain in a mood of service that eye contact. And so this pressure, these different ways of putting pressure on the sadhaka, may bring other things to the surface if they're there. And that's useful because then it allows us to see where our shortcomings are, essentially, where we still need to grow, where sincerity or non-exclusiveness, kind of independent desires may still be lurking in the heart. So in this example, when Nrsimha, through his anger, is just like the whole situation's just like just pressurized. It's like in a vacuum. It's like, I mean, just imagine the anger, the intensity of Nrsimha's anger. And in the presence of that, the demigods, because of their other desires, because they lack unalloyed devotion and still have desires for karma and gyan and so forth, they can't approach him. That pressure's too much. They just can't muster up the fearlessness that unalloyed devotion brings out in one. The text 2 even goes as far to say that the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi, was requested to go before the Lord by all the demigods present, but because of fear could not do so. By all the demigods present who because of fear could not do so, that being the demigods. But even she had never seen such a wonderful and extraordinary form of the Lord, and thus she could not approach him. So this is an interesting verse because Lakshmi, of course, does have exclusive devotion to the feet of Narayan. She is certainly an Ekanta Bhakta, Bhaktin. But Vishwanath says that although Lakshmi is pure-hearted, Leela Shakti, so Yogamaya, is caused this sense in her that she'd never seen this form of Nrsimha, and therefore unable to approach and appease him. So Yogamaya is doing this, Vishwanath says, to create a sense of astonishment, adbhuta rasa. It kind of creates essentially to glorify Prahlada that much more. So Yogamaya through, or Lakshmi through the facilitation of Yogamaya is astonished so that she can't approach Nrsimha, so that Prahlada's glory, his fearlessness, his exclusive, pure-hearted devotion can shine that much more. And so we read on, Prahlada doesn't go forth on his own, I guess, in his own humility. He doesn't approach Nrsimha, but Brahma requests him. He said, "My dear son, Lord Nrsimhadev is extremely angry at your demonic father. Please go forward and appease the Lord." And so on this request, Narad says, although the exalted devotee Prahlada Maharaj was only a little boy, he accepted Lord Brahma's words. He gradually proceeded toward Lord Nrsimhadev and fell down to offer his respectful obeisances with folded hands. When Lord Nrsimhadev saw the small boy Prahlad Maharaj prostrated at the soles of his lotus feet, he became most ecstatic in affection toward his devotee. Raising Prahlad, the Lord placed his lotus hand upon the boy's head, because his hand is always ready to create fearlessness in all of his devotees. So, describes how although he was a small child, small in stature, small in strength, small in kind of external position, he was kind of single purpose in his mind, very, very focused, exclusive in what his desire, intention was. So I think this is a beautiful example of how we really don't need a lot of facility, a lot of money, a lot of strength, a lot of intelligence, all these kind of ways to create a sense of enlargement. But really, if we can just hone what we have, if we can just orient properly that what we have, it's not that we need to add on a bunch of things, but what we have, if we can just give that, if we can just be one-pointed and resolute in that, the veracity, the intensity, the sweetness of that will outshine all other larger and more what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think. all other larger forms of power and so forth. This is really the power, the strength of the devotee, is their exclusiveness, their single desire to serve Sri Krishna. That's where all their fearlessness and their strength to do service comes from. All Prahlad does is, initially, he goes on to offer many beautiful prayers, but initially all he does is just pay obeisances. And it's just this simple act, but with a pure heart, with simple-hearted intentions, that Nrsimhadev is fully appeased. Nrsimhadev was totally consumed in anger, and just to see this, so much affection came to him that he just totally forgets about his anger, and and he focuses. In return, it's kind of a reciprocal, because Prahlad's approaching him with exclusive devotion. Nrsimha is going to respond with exclusive attention. Again, that tunnel vision. There's other demigods. Hiranyakashipu is still there, dead, lying on the floor, but all of a sudden Nrsimha has tunnel vision. All of a sudden he's focused solely in on his devotee, his dear devotee, and places his hand on his head in great affection. And so we don't, again, just this emphasis that it's not about the intellect, the philosophical and artful nature of our prayers, but really the pure, sincere heart behind all of it that will get the attention of Sri Krishna. And so simple offering with a pure heart is what we see exemplified here by Prahlad, and what we see able to appease and pacify and give bliss, give pleasure, which is the Krishnadas Kaviraj describes. Kama means to please the senses. Prem means to please the senses of Sri Krishna. So this is what we're seeking. We're seeking to give pleasure to Sri Krishna. And so how that's done, exemplified here through Prahlada, is through this simple-hearted, exclusive approach of service. So yeah, I think that's a nice way to understand how it's through this exclusiveness, through this exclusive devotion, that all these other beautiful qualities of Prahlada are coming out, and how this simplicity of heart is a manifestation of his simple and sweet connection to Sri Krishna. So that's pretty much all I have today on one-pointedness of Prahlada. I have a couple concluding words, though, that I'd like to share, just kind of to sum up the classes so far, in which we've been exploring how it is that bhakti is rendered most fully through a simple heart. And some thoughts, just like to look back on what we've explored, is that how the simplicity of bhakti is not an intellectual affair. I mean, it can be intellectual, it cannot be, but it's not. That's not the simplicity of it. But it is a deep and sacrificial affair in its detachment. So it's not necessarily through the intellect. We use our intellect in detachment, but it's not through the intellect that we find detachment, but it's through deep introspection and sacrifice. As we sacrifice ourselves in service and introspect in connection to that service, that we are able to cultivate detachment and the simplicity in our lives and sadhana that affords. The simplicity of bhakti is not strenuous, but it is steady and artful in its proper utility of time. So sometimes the idea of not wasting time can be like almost like very kind of effort-based. You have to like struggle and try really, really hard. And there's effort, no doubt. But it's more in, I think, steadiness, finding kind of steady inspiration and being artful, being dynamic in knowing ourselves and knowing what we need and what moves us and so forth, to find ways to use our time properly for bhakti. The simplicity of bhakti is not complex, but it is all encompassing and connective in its compassion for all living beings. So it's this inner connection, this deep connection that we find through bhakti and all of the beings is a very simple, direct kind of oneness that we were talking about, the Veda Bhed. And so this kind of underlying oneness that we feel with other living beings and our compassion for them, and how that connects us, that interconnectedness of the environment, and how we're able to correspondingly see that as a friendly, conducive place for our bhakti. And the simplicity of bhakti is not fanatical, but it is focused and exclusive in its one-pointed, unalloyed desire to please Krishna. So Of course, I'm sure we all have experience with seeing fanatical expressions of religion, but we should be able to distinguish that from focused and exclusive and unalloyed. So one may be so absorbed and focused in that they may not have time, they may not have mental space for other things. It's not that they're being fanatical, but really just connecting with their deepest artha, their deepest value, deepest goal of life. And they may be able to develop some kind of tunnel vision, which we've been talking about today, where the picture of Sri Krishna and his service are able to come into view, and correspondingly other things are able to fade out of one's view, one's vision. And so, these are kind of ways to think about simplicity and how to cultivate those different elements in one's life, in connection to this current class on one-pointedness. I had an interesting dream last night. I hope it's okay to share. I was visited by a very advanced and venerable Vaishnavi in our Sangha, Vrindaranya Dasi. In the dream, I was at Audarya, and she expressed to me some disappointment in my own personal lack of exclusiveness and one-pointedness in my sadhana. She said that although it is nice to take inspiration, I'm kind of generalizing her words, the feeling I got, but what I took from her was she said, although it is nice to take inspiration from other sanghas, other spiritual paths, and even other people of the world, don't spend too much time and mental focus doing so. If you do, that which is absolute will start to become relative in your mind. Our goal is very specific, and it will only get more specific. Hone in on that. There is no limit of learning and revelation there. So, I felt like that was a helpful message to me. We can take inspiration from others and so forth, but there's such an ocean. There's such a depth and an ocean to dive into in our path, and specifically our connection to our path with Shri Guru and so forth, and to find some exclusive taste in that exclusiveness is, I think, will help us kind of hone in on the specificity of what we're trying to attain and trying to orient ourselves towards. And so I felt blessed to receive that kind of personal message for myself. I just wanted to share that if maybe others will take inspiration in their own way from that too. I don't think it necessarily is a universal thing for everyone, but I felt like something given to me, and maybe others too. So with that in mind, I think we can offer one last prayer to Prahlada, asking for his blessings that we, as we try to cultivate simplicity in our minds, hearts, and actions, through meditating on the qualities of simple Vaishnavas and trying to imbibe that in our own selves. May we do that for the sole purpose of deepening our love and service to Gopal Krishna. So let's all for today. Thank you for joining. Panchakapatarubiya cha kripasinubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namaha. So I appreciate you guys all tuning in for any classes this series. It's been an interesting series for me. My first time kind of giving a series of classes. So big learning experience. So thanks for your patience with me. But if you guys have any questions or thoughts, comments, and so forth, you're welcome to share them now.
Very well, Kishore. Thank you very much for your series. I really enjoyed it. And thank you for sharing your dream about Vrindaranya. That was inspirational. Yeah, it came at very, very opportune timing for me too. So thank you. Yeah.
Glad to hear. Thank you for sharing. Okay, well, I guess we can end there. Thank you again to Ananga Manjari for translating into Spanish, and thank you for everyone who's joined and given support through your time. So again, Vanchakapatarubyas cha Kripasindubhyeva cha Patinam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo. Haribo.
Kishore Krishna Prabhu ki jai.
Jai.
Oh.